Most people believe that seeing the truth others miss is a gift. But what if this gift turns you into a target? In a world built on illusions, clarity is not welcomed, it's feared. This video will expose the brutal reality of what happens when you see too clearly in a world that thrives on blindness, and how to protect yourself from the consequences of that dangerous clarity. In a world governed by illusion, clarity is a form of rebellion. It doesn't matter if your intentions are pure. If you see the truth and speak it without permission, you are automatically classified as a threat. This is not because the truth is evil, but because it is inconvenient. Systems of power, whether political, religious, or social, are not built on absolute truth. They are built on the agreement of perception. And whoever disrupts that perception disrupts the order that benefits the few and pacifies the many. Clarity does not elevate you above others. It isolates you from them. The man who sees the manipulation in leadership, the silent consent in injustice, or the psychological tools of control used daily, he becomes a mirror to everyone else's ignorance. And that is precisely why he must be removed. He is not welcomed into the inner circle. He is not praised for his wisdom. He is whispered about, cast aside, and if he speaks too loudly, he is hunted. The people are not looking for saviors. They are looking for distractions. And when a man with clarity refuses to play that game, he ruins the show. That makes him dangerous. Clarity, then, is not celebrated because it strips the theater of its costumes. People want myths more than facts. They want comforting lies, not uncomfortable truths. A man who sees through the illusion becomes a living contradiction to the lie they want to believe. His very presence is a disruption, not because he attacks, but because he sees. And in that clarity, he becomes unbearable to the blind. Not because he is wrong, but because he makes them feel exposed. In a society that rewards delusion, sight is not a gift, it's a provocation. Look at history. The prophets, the visionaries, the thinkers who dared to say, this is not what it seems. They were not embraced. They were imprisoned, exiled, executed. Not because their insights were invalid, but because their clarity cut too deep. And no empire, no ideology, no ruler wants a man walking freely who can see where the bones are buried. It's not that people don't want truth. They don't want your truth to disrupt their comfort. Clarity threatens the false peace, the carefully arranged stability, and the artificial harmony that fragile minds need to function. When you show people what they've avoided seeing, they won't thank you. They'll blame you for the discomfort your presence creates. But clarity does something even more powerful and more dangerous. It exposes motives. It reveals that what appears noble is often strategic, that what is praised as virtuous is usually transactional, that what looks like unity is often submission. When you see the hidden intentions behind people's behavior, you become a disruption in the social ecosystem. You make people feel naked. The person who sees too clearly, even without saying a word, becomes a threat to every manipulator, every pretender, every tyrant disguised as a savior. Because once someone sees through the facade, they can no longer be controlled through fear, praise, or shame. And that is the one thing systems of power cannot tolerate: a man who cannot be managed. Clarity also introduces an imbalance of power. It's not brute strength, but intellectual leverage. And those who live in illusion sense this instinctively. They feel disarmed around the one who sees. They may not know why, but they sense a threat, not to their life, but to their identity. That threat creates resentment, envy, suspicion. So even if the man with clarity speaks gently, behaves morally, and minds his own business, he will still be regarded with distrust. Not because of what he does, but because of what he represents, the collapse of the lie. This is why it is foolish to expect applause for understanding. The higher your perception climbs, the lonelier your position becomes. There is no committee waiting to crown you wise. There is only the quiet realization that truth, in its raw form, is not beautiful to those who built their lives on fiction. To see clearly is to witness the mechanisms behind the smiling mask. It's to hear the selfish intent behind the polite words. It's to notice the desperation behind the virtue signaling. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. But neither can they unfeel your awareness. Even if you remain silent, your clarity radiates. It changes the energy of every room you enter. People know you see them, and that makes them afraid, not because you are cruel, but because you cannot be deceived. The man who sees must understand one thing: perception is political. It must be wielded, not displayed. If you make clarity your weapon, it must be concealed until it's needed. Never assume that seeing the truth grants you power. It only grants you danger, unless you understand how to use it strategically. The moment you begin to see what others ignore, you will start to drift away from them, not by choice, but by necessity. It is not a deliberate exile. It is the natural consequence of clarity. Understanding creates separation. The more clearly you see the world, the more difficult it becomes to participate in its delusions. You no longer laugh at the same shallow jokes. You no longer celebrate the same victories. You no longer believe in the same ideals. And so, without saying a word, you distance yourself. You become a foreigner in your own society. People are not bonded by truth, they are bonded by shared illusions. Family, friends, colleagues, their unity depends on unspoken agreements. Agreements to ignore, to pretend, to accept. When you break that agreement by perceiving what lies beneath, you rupture the comfort they cling to, and for that, you will be punished. Not directly. Not with violence or confrontation, but with quiet exclusion, with subtle rejection, with emotional distance that grows like a cold fog. You are not like them anymore, and people despise the reminder that their world is fragile. Your clarity reminds them of everything they've been running from. You do not belong, not because you've done something wrong, but because you've stepped beyond the limits of their understanding. Solitude becomes your companion, not because you seek it, but because it is the only environment where your vision can remain unpolluted. You will speak less, because the more you say, the more you realize no one truly hears. Arguments become tiresome. You are no longer arguing about facts or logic. You are confronting programmed defenses. People don't want insight, they want confirmation. When you refuse to give it, they label you arrogant, cold, or difficult. In truth, you have simply moved beyond the need for mass validation. You are not above them, you are alone. Isolation, however, is not merely a social condition. It becomes psychological. You begin to question your own mind. Am I wrong? Am I too extreme? Is it worth it to see clearly if it means I must stand alone? This is the internal war of the thinker, not the war of ego, but the war of sanity. Because in a world where illusion is the norm, clarity feels like madness. You are outnumbered. You are unheard. And in the absence of support, doubt grows like a parasite. It takes strength not to collapse into the comfort of the crowd. It takes brutal self-discipline to endure the cold of independent thought. You may attempt to return, to lower your vision, to rejoin the group, to feel warmth again. But it will not last. Once you've seen, you cannot unsee. Once you know, you cannot unknow. The veil has been torn and you are cursed with awareness. So you go back into isolation, not because you hate people, but because you no longer belong to their world. You watch them, but you are not with them. You speak, but your words do not land. You care, but they cannot receive it. And so you build your kingdom within. You learn to live without applause. You begin to trust your silence more than their noise. The great mistake is thinking you can drag others to your level of perception. You cannot. Vision is not transferable. You may try to explain, to guide, to awaken, but you will fail. Not because you are wrong, but because they are not ready. And in the attempt, you will bleed. They will mock you, dismiss you, or worse, paint you as the enemy. They will protect their illusions with fury. And when you realize that truth alone cannot free anyone who is addicted to lies, you retreat again. Wiser this time, less hopeful, but also more precise. This isolation becomes your strength if you can endure it. It sharpens your instincts. It removes distractions. It teaches you how to think without interference. The noise of the world no longer seduces you. The trends, the emotional contagion, the shallow victories, they fade into background noise. You begin to value depth. You begin to move with purpose. And though the loneliness never disappears entirely, it becomes bearable. Because you are no longer seeking to be understood, you are focused on understanding. The man who sees must not fear being alone. He must learn to use it. In isolation, he observes more. He listens better. He watches how the herd moves, how the system flows, how the masks shift depending on the room. And from this distance, he gains something the crowd can never possess: strategic clarity. He no longer reacts. He calculates. He no longer shouts. He waits. And in that waiting, he becomes powerful. Because he is not consumed by the need to belong, he is guided only by what is real. The moment you begin to see the hidden layers beneath power, behavior, and society, you unknowingly mark yourself. Not with a physical sign, but with a subtle energy that others can sense, even if they don't consciously understand it. You walk into a room and eyes linger on you slightly longer. Conversations pause in your presence. You are not welcome in certain spaces, and you're not sure why. It's because your perception disturbs the environment. People can feel it, that you are not fooled, that you are not playing the same game, and that quiet awareness makes you dangerous in their eyes. You may believe that knowledge is neutral, that simply seeing something for what it is shouldn't provoke hostility. But power never operates on fairness. It operates on fear. And when you see clearly, you no longer submit blindly. That lack of submission is viewed as rebellion. Even if you say nothing, your existence sends a message: I cannot be deceived. That alone is enough to unsettle both the manipulators and their followers. The first see a threat to their control. The second feel exposed in their ignorance. Neither will treat you kindly. This is why true insight must be carried like a concealed weapon. To see behind the curtain is to realize that most people are actors reading from a script they didn't write. Politics, religion, social rituals, all of it is theater. Some are aware of their roles, most are not. But if you begin to recognize the manipulation, the virtue used to cover self-interest, the morality used to justify control, the language designed to seduce rather than inform, and if you let it be known that you see it, you will not be ignored. You will be targeted, and they won't attack your insight directly. They will attack your character, your motives, your credibility. Because here's the truth. Systems cannot survive if too many people wake up at once. The illusion must remain intact. So, the individual who sees it for what it is becomes the enemy of the order, not because he is violent, but because he can unravel it by simply telling the truth. Those who benefit from falsehood are terrified of those who don't need it. They know that the person who sees cannot be bribed with praise, manipulated with fear, or distracted by status. That level of immunity is dangerous. Because it's not loud, it's quiet, not erratic, but composed. And nothing is more threatening to the architects of deception than someone they cannot predict or influence. Often, it comes from the people closest to you. Friends, family, colleagues, those who once celebrated your intelligence now call you arrogant. The more clearly you speak, the more they twist your words. You become too intense, too critical, too serious. Why? Because your presence pierces their illusions. They've built lives around lies. Lies about success, love, identity, meaning. And when you no longer entertain those lies, they feel attacked. They feel judged, even when you say nothing. Your clarity reflects back the shadows they've refused to face. And instead of looking inward, they point outward at you. That's the paradox of insight. The more accurate your perception becomes, the more others will seek to distort your image. They'll reduce your truth to bitterness, your warnings to paranoia, your discernment to arrogance. They don't want to engage with what you see. They want to discredit you so they don't have to. It's not a debate, it's a defense mechanism. Because if they were to admit you might be right, their whole world would have to be reevaluated. And most people would rather destroy the messenger than rewrite the story of their lives. Even more dangerous is when your insight threatens the hierarchy. If you see through a leader, a system, or a popular narrative, and you speak about it, you become a heretic. Not because what you're saying is false, but because it threatens the established structure. The heretic is never condemned for being wrong. He's condemned for being right too soon. His timing is what makes him intolerable. He introduces ideas that people aren't ready to hear, and because of that, they reject him not only intellectually, but emotionally. They have to. Otherwise, they'd have to face the discomfort of their own complicity. That's why intelligence must be masked and vision must be veiled. If you see the battlefield clearly, you do not shout about your position. You move silently, you watch, you listen, you wait. Because if you reveal too much too early, you will be neutralized, not with bullets, but with reputation. You will be mocked, misrepresented, and marginalized. And the irony is, the more right you are, the more violent the backlash becomes. Truth doesn't provoke violence because it's offensive. It provokes violence because it's undeniable. This is why the wise learn to protect their insight with indifference. They understand that to preserve their power, they must never expose all of it. Not every battle is worth fighting. Not every truth is worth sharing. Some truths are weapons meant to be used strategically, not broadcasted for applause. Because once people know what you know, their first instinct will not be gratitude, it will be fear. And from that fear, they will strike. To see what others cannot is not enough. Insight without discipline is vulnerability. Many intelligent men have perished not because they were wrong, but because they revealed too much too soon, mistaking perception for power. But vision is not strength on its own, it is raw material. What you do with that material determines your survival. Strategy is the refining fire. Without it, even the clearest mind is just a visible target waiting to be destroyed. In a world where the majority prefer comfort over clarity, the man who sees must learn to act as if he doesn't. He must adopt a kind of intentional blindness, not to deceive himself, but to protect what he knows. You do not walk into a crowd of the blind waving your torch. They will not thank you for the light. They will tear you apart to preserve the darkness. This is the nature of self-deception. The man who exposes it becomes the enemy of everyone who depends on it. Therefore, if you are one who sees, you must choose silence as your shield. But silence is not enough if it is born out of fear. It must be strategic. You do not remain quiet to hide, you remain quiet to maneuver. Every insight you possess becomes more valuable when it is reserved, not scattered. Knowledge is like currency. It gains power when withheld and spent with precision. Those who reveal all they know become predictable, and the predictable are always exploitable. The wise man never lets the world map his mind. He shows what he must when it serves him and conceals the rest until the right moment. To protect your vision, you must first understand its weight. Every time you reveal what you see, you risk losing the element of surprise. And in any power structure, personal or political, surprise is leverage. If people know you see them clearly, they adjust their mask. They modify their tactics. They become harder to read. But if you remain quiet, if you allow them to underestimate you, you gain the advantage of misdirection. They assume you are naive, agreeable, or indifferent. Let them. That assumption is your armor. While they play openly, you observe silently. While they posture, you position. There is a time to expose and a time to wait. Only a fool confuses urgency with opportunity. Just because you see the truth does not mean now is the time to act on it. Timing is what separates the visionary from the strategist. The visionary sees the storm before it arrives. The strategist waits until the storm works in his favor. There is no virtue in rushing into battle without control. If your clarity makes you impulsive, it is not clarity. It is ego disguised as urgency. The real power lies in restraint. Understand that not every truth must be spoken. Not every insight must be shared. Your mind is a vault, and the contents are weapons. You do not hand your weapons to everyone you meet. You do not explain yourself to those who aren't prepared to understand. You do not waste your thoughts on those who treat them as threats. Guard your perception like a king guards his throne. You do not defend it with noise. You defend it with distance. This strategic concealment does not mean you become dishonest. It means you become tactical. There is a difference between lying and withholding. The world often forces you into situations where exposure is suicide. In those moments, your silence is not cowardice. It is calculated protection. The wise man does not need to prove himself to the ignorant. His time is not spent convincing, but advancing. The moment you begin to argue with those who refuse to see, you descend to their level. And at that level, vision is not an advantage. It is a burden. You protect your vision by recognizing who deserves to witness it. Insight is sacred. It is not for the masses. It is not for the impulsive. It is for those who can match it with discipline. When you find such individuals, alliances form that cannot be shaken. But these are rare. Most people will misunderstand, misquote, or misuse what you reveal. And so, you reveal almost nothing. You study, you adapt, and you play the long game. The truth is not in the telling, it is in the timing. And timing belongs only to the man who watches, waits, and strikes when the world least expects it. To see what others don't is both a curse and a crown. It sets you apart, not above, but beyond. It forces you into a different rhythm, one not aligned with the herd, but with something colder, sharper, and far more dangerous. Clarity makes you invisible to the foolish, yet a threat to the powerful. You cannot rely on applause, comfort, or belonging. Your insight strips you of those illusions. But what you gain in return, if you know how to wield it, is sovereignty. You must understand that the world is not built for the man who sees. It is built for those who obey the rules without asking who wrote them. The man who sees is not expected to win. He is expected to conform or to be destroyed. And yet, there is another path. A path carved not by rebellion, but by strategy. If you can endure the loneliness of perception, protect your vision with silence, and turn your clarity into controlled action, you do not just survive in a world of blindness, you dominate it. The danger of seeing what others don't is real. But it becomes your greatest advantage when you no longer seek permission to see, nor validation for it. The wise man knows power is not in sight alone. Power is in knowing exactly when to use it.